The food court of the Northgate Mall hummed with the predictable chaos of a Saturday afternoon. The air was thick with the competing smells of greasy pizza and sugary cinnamon rolls. Amidst the scattered families and clusters of teenagers, a group of 5 men sat at a long table, an island of black leather and denim in a sea of bright consumerism. They were members of the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club, and their presence, as always, created a subtle ripple in the fabric of the crowd. People gave their table a wide berth, eyes sliding past their patched vests and weathered faces, making assumptions based on 100 movies they had seen. Victor, the club's president, took a slow bite of a burger. His hair was gray at the temples, and his eyes, deep-set and watchful, missed nothing. He was built not like a bodybuilder, but like a man who had worked hard his entire life. To his right sat Bear, a mountain of a man whose nickname required no explanation. Across from them, Doc, a wiry man with a surprisingly gentle demeanor, picked at a salad. He had been a combat medic, and the name had stuck. They ate in comfortable silence, the low rumble of their conversation, a stark contrast to the high-pitched squeals and chatter that filled the cavernous space. It was a small sound, a tiny hiccup of distress, that first cut through the noise. Victor's head came up, his gaze sweeping the area. He saw her then. A little girl, no older than 6, standing alone near a trash receptacle. She wore a pink dress that was smudged with dirt and a single white sock. Her face was pale, her big blue eyes wide with a terror that was profoundly out of place among the brightly lit storefronts. She was clutching a small, worn teddy bear, its button eyes staring out with the same lost expression. The girl's eyes scanned the crowd, flitting from face to face, searching for something she couldn't find. Her gaze passed over smiling families and dismissive shoppers until it landed on the table of bikers. She hesitated, her small body trembling. She looked from Victor's steady gaze to Bear's immense frame, and for a moment it seemed she would turn and run. But then her eyes met Victor's again, and something in his quiet stillness must have registered as different from the frantic energy around them. She took a tentative step forward, then another. She moved with a strange, shuffling gait, as if trying to make herself invisible. The shoppers around her parted without noticing, lost in their own worlds. She navigated the maze of tables and chairs until she stood beside Victor. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply waited, letting her set the pace. He could feel the eyes of his men on him, all of them having ceased their meals, their bodies now poised with a silent, waiting tension. The little girl looked up at his face, her chin barely clearing the tabletop. She leaned in close, so close he could smell the faint scent of playground dust and bubblegum. Her voice, when it came, was a breath of sound, a secret meant only for him. "She's not my real mommy," she whispered, her small hand clutching the fabric of his jeans. The words hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. In that instant, the entire world narrowed to the space between the giant biker and the tiny, terrified child. Victor's reaction was immediate, but it was not loud or explosive. It was a study in absolute control. He placed his hand gently over hers, a silent promise of protection. His eyes flickered to his men. No words were needed. Bear shifted his weight, his chair scraping softly against the tile. Doc was already pushing his tray aside, his focus entirely on the girl. "It's okay," Victor said, his voice a low, calming rumble. "We hear you." Just then, a woman appeared, moving through the crowd with an air of frantic authority. She was perfectly dressed in expensive athletic wear, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her face was a mask of worried concern, but her eyes were cold and hard, like chips of ice. "Lily, there you are. Oh, thank goodness. You had Mommy so worried." The woman reached for the girl, her fingers like talons. The child, Lily, flinched violently and pressed herself harder against Victor's leg. "No," she whimpered. The the sound muffled against the denim. Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply moved his body, a slight but definitive shift that placed him squarely between the woman and the girl. "That's enough," he said. The two words were spoken quietly, but they carried the weight of an iron door slamming shut. The woman's practiced smile faltered. She looked at Victor, her eyes cataloging his leather vest, the club patches, the sheer, unmovable presence of him. A flicker of annoyance crossed her features. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I don't know what my daughter told you, but she has a habit of telling stories. We were playing a game of hide and seek." "She doesn't look like she's playing," Doc noted from across the table, his voice calm and clinical. He was observing the woman, his medic's eyes taking in the slight tremor in her hand, the way her gaze darted around, assessing the audience she was gathering. The woman's face tightened. She tried to laugh it off, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "Well, she's a very dramatic little girl. Now, Lily, come along. It's time to go home." She tried to step around Victor, her movements quick and impatient. Bear rose from his chair. He didn't say a word. He just stood up to his full 6'6" height, casting a shadow over the woman and her designer outfit. He crossed his arms over his massive chest, a human wall of muscle and leather. The woman stopped dead in her tracks, her arrogant demeanor finally cracking under the pressure of his silent opposition. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed, her voice losing its polished edge. "You can't just keep my child. I'll call security. I'll call the police." "We were hoping you would," Victor said calmly. He looked down at the little girl, who was now peeking out from behind his leg. He gave her small hand a gentle squeeze. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she whispered. "Okay, Lily," Victor said softly. "You're going to be okay. We're not going to let anyone hurt you." He looked back at the woman, his eyes locking onto hers. There was no anger in his expression, only a cold, hard certainty. "The girl says you're not her mother." The woman's facade of the concerned parent began to crumble completely, replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. "And you're going to believe a confused child over me? Look at you, a bunch of overgrown thugs. The police will take one look at you and know exactly who the problem is here." She was playing to the crowd now, her voice rising in pitch, trying to paint them as the aggressors. Some onlookers were pulling out their phones, their expressions a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. They saw a frantic, well-dressed mother and a group of intimidating bikers. The narrative seemed obvious, but Victor wasn't concerned with the crowd. He was focused on the details. He had lived a life where noticing the small things could mean the difference between life and death. He gestured subtly to Doc, who understood immediately. Doc leaned forward, his voice maintaining its even therapeutic tone. "Lily," Doc said, addressing the child directly, his voice gentle. "That's a very pretty dress. Did your mommy buy it for you?" Lily shook her head, burying her face again. "My real mommy did," she mumbled, "for my birthday." Doc nodded slowly, then looked at the woman. "When was her birthday?" he asked, the question casual, almost conversational. The woman was momentarily thrown. "What? That's none of your business." "A mother usually remembers her child's birthday," Doc pressed, his gaze unwavering, "especially the one where she got that pretty pink dress." Panic flashed in the woman's eyes. It was a fleeting expression, but in the tense silence of the standoff, it was as loud as a scream. "It was last month," she stammered, guessing. "The 10th. Victor knelt, bringing himself down to Lily's level, ignoring the strain in his knees. He shielded her from the woman's view, creating a safe space for just the two of them. "Lily," he whispered, his voice softer than anyone in the food court would have thought possible. "When did you get your dress?" Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes swimming with tears. "Yesterday," she whispered back. My birthday was yesterday. Mommy made me a cake with a unicorn. Victor's jaw tightened. He had his confirmation. He rose slowly, his gaze once again finding the woman. He didn't need to say anything. The cold, hard truth was reflected in his eyes. The woman saw it, and her composure shattered. The mask of civility fell away, revealing the ugly, desperate predator beneath. You little brat, she snarled at Lily, her voice a venomous hiss. I should have left you in the car. That was it. That was the final piece. The admission, born of pure rage and frustration, sealed her fate. Before she could make another move, before she could lunge for the child or try to run, 2 uniformed mall security guards arrived, followed closely by a pair of local police officers. They had been called by a bystander, their expressions grim as they took in the strange scene. What's going on here? The older officer asked, his hand resting on his service weapon. The woman immediately launched into her performance, pointing a trembling finger at Victor. Officer, thank God. These animals are trying to take my daughter. They're scaring her. Arrest them. But the officer's gaze wasn't on the bikers. It was on the little girl hiding behind the largest of them, and on the raw, undisguised hatred on the woman's face. He was a veteran cop who had seen this kind of domestic dispute 100 times, but something about this felt different. He saw the bikers standing calm and still, making no threatening moves. They looked less like aggressors and more like guardians. Sir, the officer said, addressing Victor with a measure of caution, can you tell me what happened? Victor didn't move from his position in front of Lily. The little girl came to us for help, he said, his voice level and factual. She said this woman is not her mother. She just confirmed it. He relayed the conversation about the birthday, his tone devoid of emotion, simply stating the facts as they had unfolded. The woman began to shriek, a torrent of denials and accusations. He's lying. They're twisting her words. She's my daughter. I have her birth certificate in my purse. It was a desperate, foolish bluff. The officer held up a hand to silence her. He knelt, just as Victor had done, trying to get a look at the child. Hey there, he said gently. I'm Officer Miller. Can you tell me your name? Lily peeked out, her eyes moving from the officer's friendly face to Victor's reassuring presence. She seemed to draw strength from the biker's stillness. My name is Lily Anderson, she said, her voice small but clear. And who is this lady? Officer Miller asked, gesturing toward the increasingly agitated woman. Lily's face crumpled, but she found her courage. I don't know, she cried. She took me from the park. She said she had puppies in her car. She told me to call her mommy, but she's not my mommy. The entire food court fell silent. The truth, delivered in the simple, unvarnished words of a child, was devastating. The woman's face went white with fury and fear. She took a step back, her eyes darting toward the exit. It was a fatal mistake. Bear took one deliberate step to his left, cutting off her only path of escape. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. The sheer finality of his movement was enough. She was trapped. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back, Officer Miller said, his voice now cold and official. His partner was already moving, handcuffs at the ready. The woman let out a final desperate squawk of protest before she was efficiently restrained. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by the sullen, bitter reality of defeat. As the officers led the kidnapper away, a new wave of emotion washed over the food court. The fear and suspicion directed at the bikers moments before had transformed into awe and relief. People were lowering their phones, their faces etched with a dawning understanding. They had witnessed something extraordinary. They had misjudged completely. Doc had already knelt beside Lily, opening a small first aid kit he always carried in a pouch on his belt. Let's take a look at you, he said softly. Did she hurt you anywhere? He gently examined her bare foot, noting a few small scrapes, but nothing serious. He cleaned them with an antiseptic wipe, his movements deft and practiced. He produced a small bottle of water from his vest pocket and handed it to her. Lily took the water, her hands still shaking. She looked up at the circle of large men who now stood around her, not in a threatening way, but like a ring of ancient standing stones, shielding her from the rest of the world. For the first time since she had appeared, a small measure of safety began to dawn in her eyes. Victor knelt again. "You were very brave, Lily," he said, his voice full of a warmth that would have shocked anyone who judged him by his appearance. "You did the right thing. You're safe now. We've got you. Nothing else is going to happen to you. That's a promise." A promise from a man like Victor was not a casual thing. It was a vow, sealed with the unspoken code of his brotherhood. Lily seemed to understand this on an instinctual level. She leaned forward and, without a word, wrapped her small arms around his thick neck, burying her face in the worn leather of his vest. Victor froze for a second, unaccustomed to such a display, then slowly, carefully, he wrapped one arm around her, holding her gently. Over her small, trembling shoulder, he met the eyes of his men. They nodded in silent, unified agreement. This was their responsibility now. The police took their statements, the process methodical and professional. Officer Miller, a man with kids of his own, treated the bikers with a newfound respect. He had seen the initial scene and heard the woman's accusations, but the evidence was undeniable, and the bikers' calm, protective demeanor spoke volumes. "You guys did good," he said to Victor as they finished up. "Most people would have just looked the other way." "We're not most people," Victor replied simply. The immediate crisis was over, but the larger problem remained. Lily was safe, but she was still lost. The officers took her to the station to be interviewed by a child services specialist while they tried to locate her parents. A missing child report had been filed an hour earlier from a park on the other side of town, and they were confident they would make a match soon. As the police car pulled away, with Lily waving a small, hesitant goodbye from the back seat, the iron sentinels stood for a moment in the now quieting food court. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a grim sense of purpose. "What now, Vic?" Bear asked, his voice a low rumble. "Now we make sure she stays safe," Victor said, his gaze fixed on the exit where the police car had disappeared. Permanently. They returned to their clubhouse, a nondescript building on the industrial edge of town. Inside, the smell of old leather, motor oil, and stale beer hung in the air. It was their sanctuary, a place where the rules of the outside world didn't apply. They were governed by their own code, one forged in shared hardship and unbreakable loyalty. Victor called a brief meeting what they called church. The five of them gathered around a heavy oak table, the surface scarred with decades of history. "The girl, Lily," Victor began. "The cops will find her parents. That's the easy part. The hard part is what comes next. The woman who took her, she'll get a lawyer. She might make bail. She knows what Lily looks like." "And she knows what we look like," Doc added grimly. "She does," Victor agreed, "but she doesn't know who we are. We need to find out who Lily's family is. We need to know where they live. We need to make sure they're protected until this is over." A younger member, a prospect named Ricky, who had been cleaning the bar, spoke up hesitantly. "But, Prez, that's a police matter. If we get involved, we could bring heat on the club." Bear turned his massive head and fixed Ricky with a stare that could curdle milk. "The girl came to us," he growled. "Not the cops, not the security guards. Us. That makes it a club matter." Victor held up a hand, silencing Bear. He looked at Ricky, his expression not angry, but educational. "Bear is right. We don't go looking for this kind of trouble, son. But when it finds us, we finish it. That's the rule. A child asked us for help. There is no other consideration. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Ricky said, his face flushing. I understand. Good, Victor said. He turned to Doc. Doc, you've got the contacts. I want you to find out everything you can about this woman, her name, her record, where she lives, and I want you to get the details on Lily's family as soon as the cops release them. Be discreet. Doc simply nodded. His past was murky, but everyone knew he had skills that went far beyond patching up road rash. He had a network of contacts from his time in the service, people who knew how to find information that wasn't readily available to the public. By the next morning, the story of the mall rescue was starting to spread through town. It wasn't in the newspaper yet, but eyewitness accounts were traveling fast. The narrative was consistent. The terrified child, the slick kidnapper, and the silent, imposing bikers who had saved the day. For the first time in a long time, the name Iron Sentinels was being spoken with something other than fear or suspicion. Later that day, Victor got a call from Sheriff Brody, a man with whom he had a long and complicated relationship built on a grudging mutual respect. Victor, Brody said, his voice tired, I'm hearing stories. We were just having lunch, Sheriff, Victor replied. Right, and you just happened to stumble into a kidnapping, Brody said wryly. Listen, we found the girl's parents. They're good people, scared to death. The reunion was, well, you can imagine. The woman who took her, her name is Elaine Porter. No priors, but we found some disturbing things at her apartment. Looks like this wasn't her first attempt, just the first time she got caught. Is she out on bail? Victor asked, cutting to the chase. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Her lawyer is good. He's arguing for a low bail, citing no prior record. She could be out by the end of the week. Victor's knuckles whitened as he gripped the phone. That's not acceptable. I know it's not, Brody said, his voice dropping. Officially, I'm telling you to stay out of it. We'll put a watch on the family's house. We'll handle it. He paused again. Unofficially, I know you guys have your own way of doing things. Just don't make a mess on my turf. The line went dead. That was all the confirmation Victor needed. He called Doc. We got a name, Elaine Porter. The family is the Andersons. Find them. It took Doc less than 3 hours. The Andersons lived in a small, modest house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. That evening, 2 bikes were parked at either end of their street, their riders sitting quietly in the deepening twilight. They were nearly invisible, just 2 silent sentinels watching over the house, with the light burning in the upstairs window. They would be there all night, replaced by 2 more brothers at dawn. The Andersons would never even know they were there. A few days later, Lily's mother, Sarah Anderson, reached out. She got Victor's number from Sheriff Brody, who had bent several rules to give it to her. She asked to meet him. Victor agreed, choosing a neutral location, a small coffee shop downtown. He went alone. Sarah was already there, a nervous woman with the same kind eyes as her daughter. She stood up when he walked in, her hands trembling slightly. Mr. she started, her voice catching. My name is Sarah. I don't know how to thank you. Victor, he supplied, shaking her offered hand gently. And no thanks are necessary. We just did what anyone should have. No, she insisted, tears welling in her eyes. Not anyone. Everyone else was just standing there. The police told me what happened. You saved my daughter's life. You and your friends. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Lily drew this for you. Victor took it and unfolded it. It was a child's crayon drawing. A group of big, muscular figures with beards stood around a small stick figure in a pink dress. Above them, drawn in shaky, colorful letters, it said, My Knights. Victor stared at the drawing for a long moment, an unreadable expression on his face. He carefully folded it and placed it in the inside pocket of his vest, right over his heart. Why? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was the question he had been expecting. You don't know us. Why would you risk so much for a stranger? Victor looked out the window, his mind drifting back through the years, through a haze of pain and memory he rarely revisited. When I was a kid, he began, his voice low and gravelly, about Lily's age. My home wasn't a safe place. My old man had a temper and he liked to drink. One night, it got bad, real bad. I ran. I just ran out into the street in the middle of the night, with nothing but the shirt on my back. He paused, the memory still sharp after all these decades. I ran for miles, no one stopped. Cars just swerved around me. People locked their doors. They looked right through me. I was just a piece of the scenery, a problem they didn't want. I finally collapsed in front of a little all-night diner. The cook, a big guy named Sal, came out. He didn't ask questions. He just picked me up, took me inside, and gave me a bowl of soup. He sat with me until the sun came up, and then he called the right people to get me help. He turned his gaze back to Sarah. Sal saved my life that night, not just by feeding me, but by seeing me, by not looking away. I promised myself that if I ever saw someone in that kind of trouble, lost and alone with no one to turn to, I wouldn't look away either. None of my men would. Most of them have a story like mine. Different details, same ending. We protect the ones who can't protect themselves. That's the code. It's the only one that matters. Sarah was openly crying now, tears of gratitude and understanding streaming down her face. The world needs more people like you, she whispered. The world's got plenty, Victor said, standing to leave. They just don't always look the way you expect. Elaine Porter did make bail, but she never got anywhere near the Anderson family. The day she was released, she found two very large, very quiet men sitting on motorcycles parked across the street from her apartment building. They didn't threaten her. They didn't even look at her. But they were there. They were there when she went to the store. They were there when she came back. They were a constant, silent, unmovable presence. After 3 days of this relentless, silent scrutiny, her nerve broke. She packed a bag in the middle of the night and disappeared. She had violated her bail conditions, and a warrant was issued for her arrest. Doc, through his network, tracked her to a bus station 2 states away and made an anonymous tip to the local police. She was apprehended without incident. This time, there would be no bail. The Iron Sentinels kept their silent watch over the Anderson house for another month, just to be sure. Then one day, they were simply gone. But the family's safety was secured. Victor had arranged for a new state-of-the-art security system to be installed at their house, paid for by an anonymous community fund. He also had a quiet word with a friend who owned a local construction company, and Mark Anderson, Lily's father, suddenly found himself offered a better-paying job in a safer town 50 miles away. The family moved, eager for a fresh start. A year passed, the seasons turned. The story of the bikers at the mall became something of a local legend, a tale that restored a little bit of faith in the unexpected goodness of people. The Iron Sentinels found their reputation in town had subtly shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a grudging respect and, in some corners, genuine gratitude. One sunny afternoon, Victor was at the clubhouse, polishing a piece of chrome on his bike. The big garage door was open, letting in the warm summer air. He heard a car pull up and looked over to see the Anderson family. They were all smiling. Lily, a year older and an inch taller, looked happy and healthy. The shadows were gone from her eyes. She ran to him, holding another piece of paper. "I made you another one," she announced, handing it to him. This drawing was more detailed. It showed a big house with a sun in the corner, and a happy stick-figure family playing in the yard. Parked on the street were 5 motorcycles with large, smiling figures on them, standing guard. Victor smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "It's beautiful, Lily, thank you." He walked them inside the clubhouse. There, hanging in a place of honor on the main wall, was Lily's first drawing, framed in heavy, dark wood. It was the first thing anyone saw when they walked in, a constant reminder of the club's true purpose. It was more important than any trophy, more sacred than any club charter. It was a picture of their promise, a picture of their code. The Andersons stayed for a while, sharing a bottle of soda with the men who had become their unlikely saviors. The clubhouse, a place that once seemed so intimidating, was filled with the sound of a child's happy laughter. It was a sound that fit there perfectly. As they finally drove away, waving goodbye, Bear came and stood beside Victor, watching them go. "Did good, Vic," he rumbled. Victor nodded, his eyes on the drawing in his hand. He thought of Sal, the diner cook from so long ago. He thought of a scared little boy alone in the dark, and he thought of a brave little girl who had put her trust in a group of strangers. Some debts, he knew, you spend your whole life repaying, and some promises you spend your whole life keeping. The road was long, and there would always be monsters hiding in plain sight. But there would also always be sentinels standing watch. Forward, always forward.